I'm going to show you another video. We talked a little bit about headphones, and this is part of a presentation I did and an experiment that I did with some of the headphone press out of the US and Canada, for that matter. You know the website called HeadFi? There's another one called Headphone Guru, and another one called Soundstage Magazine. Well, I invited, and there's also one called Secrets of Hi-Fi and Home Theater, or Secrets of Home Theater and Hi-Fi, and another one, I forget.
No, I think it's the gentleman, he just retired about 2 years ago. I forget his name, but he was like or maybe that's the headphone guru. Either way.
Yeah, that's Joe.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I invited them all to come to the National Research Council to help me verify the room feel. So I'm going to play a little video that sort of explains the experiment that I did, the listening test that I did. And I actually did a listening test that was, well, it explains it in the video.
Okay. There we go.
So this is the shot of the front of NRC. That's their iconic
football.
Hi, I'm Paul Barton from PSB Speakers, and we're here at the National Research Council doing an experiment that's never been done, at least by us before. And that is, we've invited a bunch of journalists from the headphone community and the audio video community to experience an experiment that will really demonstrate what we call room feel in our headphone designs. And what that means is when you put a loudspeaker, or when you put headphones on and listen to music that was recorded to be played back on loudspeakers in a room, you must compensate for this when you listen to the same music on headphones. What we're going to do here is put a pair of loudspeakers in an anechoic chamber where there is no room, and we're going to let the journalists hear what room feel sounds on a pair of loudspeakers in a dead environment, which is the same thing as listening to loudspeakers or listening to headphones with room feel in them. And we're going to ask the reviewers to compare different equalizations or compensations for the effects that the room has, and let them make judgments as to what they prefer. Hopefully they will confirm that room feel is in fact something that is an improvement in listening to headphones with music that was recorded to be played back on loudspeakers in a room. Well, here, we're in the anechoic chamber right now, and this is the physical setup of a pair of T3s, PSB T3s, our flagship, along with a subwoofer here in the middle. The chamber, of course, is anechoic, meaning it absorbs all frequencies on all the walls. And the idea here is we don't want to introduce the effects of a room in this two-channel setup, and we're going to apply the room feel curve. And we're going to let the listeners or the media people or the press people that are here to experience some different versions of room feel and let them choose which they prefer. And what will happen here is that they will be able to listen to speakers in an open space where there's no reflections, which is the same kind of situation when you put a pair of headphones on. And the idea here is to try and let them determine or realize what transfer function or what target function or what equalization needs to be applied in order for them to experience what they think would be the best sound of a two-channel system when sitting in the stereo position.
So that was an experiment we did, and I actually wrote up a presentation. I can show you the results. If you want, I can go through this for you. How much time do we have here?
You're the guest, Paul. You tell us.
Okay, well, I hope I'm not boring anyone.
No, No,
No,
trust
you're
me.
getting into really interesting stuff right now. I think
Yeah.
if you want to share it, please do.
Okay. Well, I'll just go through some of these slides and maybe explain them to you. This is the basic setup. The reason there's a speaker in the center on the chair is I was showing the listeners what the frequency response, like the microphone, that's where I would put the speaker if I was testing the speaker, because the microphones are near the left and right speaker. And so I wanted to show them the frequency response measurement in the chamber. And I guess they took the picture when the speaker was sitting on one of the chairs. That speaker is not there in the final experiment. That's where one of the listeners is. And you can see that I put one listener in front of the other so that they were both in the stereo seat. It would be very difficult to do these kind of and create a decent image in this kind of environment if you weren't, if the listener wasn't in the stereo seat. And I wanted to do more than one listener at a time, otherwise we would have been there for a couple of days. So I decided to put one chair in front of the other. And what each listener was hearing was pretty much the same thing in terms of frequency response and in terms of stereo imaging. So you can see that's the speaker on the chair. That wasn't there when we did the listening tests. And you can see I'm standing in front of the door of the chamber, and that sort of rolls out and allows you to come and go. That's the basic setup with the subwoofer. Now the grid you see on the floor, we had to put in for this experiment. Normally we don't keep the grid on the floor in just to minimize the number of surfaces that could interrupt the acoustic, the free field environment. You'll get some little bumps and ripples from reflections off that screen, even though it's fairly open. So when we're doing real measurements in the chamber, we don't use that floor, but there are times when you do use it. So I guess what I'm trying to explain is that, and I mentioned it earlier, is that at low frequencies, speakers radiate in 360 degrees. So all of the energy they put out gets into the, the energy coming from the back of the speaker and the front of the speaker and the side of the speaker. Whereas at high frequencies, more of the energy comes directly from the loudspeaker and less of it from the surfaces. So when you do a frequency response of a speaker in a room that's flat in the anechoic chamber, it never is flat in a room. This was just a slide to demonstrate that, the objective here is to see it through a colored, or see it through a clear glass. And I mentioned in that video that sometimes looking through a pair of sunglasses that are yellow tinted makes the world seem much more contrasted and brighter. And for some things and for some people's listening preferences, they enjoy that. But our goal is to make it neutral. It's harder to make something that's colored to be perfectly clear. It's easier to make something that's perfectly clear colored. So we give the customer something that's a benchmark, and then if he likes a little more treble or a little more bass, all the more power to him. One thing that's a variable that I really can't control is the variability in the recordings. I mean, in a perfect world, and this is something that will happen in the future, is that included with the recording material, the digital data, there will be metadata that your speakers can read, and your speakers can adjust to what the actual environment and the data or the sound that the engineer and musicians heard in the recording studio. And that to me is sort of like that speaker I showed you earlier on. It has feedback. In other words, you put a feedback loop around the whole process. Right now it's an open-ended loop, so you gotta sort of take what you can get. And that's unfortunate because standards in making recordings aren't as stringent as standards in sound reproduction. So it's just a little pitch for a speaker designer's frustration that I wish there were
Okay.
more standards. So here is, we use Dirac to do the EQ of the loudspeaker and then set the different target functions. So Dirac will align itself to that green curve, which is the target function. And I used 4 equalizations that the listeners could switch between. This was one EQ, number EQ1. This was EQ2, which was basically, I can't see the whole screen here, which is basically a flat response.
Oh, we see it right flat to 20 kilohertz.
Yeah, and this is curve 3, which is just a boost in the low end, and this is halfway. It's half the boost that at low frequencies that EQ1 had, and half the attenuation at the high frequencies that EQ1 had. Excuse me. So those are the 4 different. I think I plotted them all together. Yeah. So those are all 4 of the EQs that I asked the listeners to evaluate. And one of those curves is the room feel. These are the score sheets that we ask the listener to use, and trying to give some adjectives for people to, inexperienced listeners don't always have the vocabulary to make good notes and keep track of all the things that they're hearing. So giving them adjectives and things to help them express what they're hearing and make sense of what they're listening to and doing comparisons. We give them these sheets to fill out as they're doing the listening. And there would be one sheet for each speaker or each different EQ. So here are the results of the listeners. So there were 10 listeners, and you can see EQ 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see that EQ 1 was preferred. EQ 4 was second preferred. EQ 2 was the next preferred, and EQ 3 was the worst. The EQ 3 was the one that only had the bass boost. EQ 2 was flat. EQ 4 was 50% bass boost and 50% high frequency cut. So you can see that, and the numbers here are significant. Unfortunately, this was more of a public relations activity, but I felt that it would be useful if we could, we didn't do enough experiments with the same individuals to be totally scientific, but the indications on this particular experiment verified. And then of course, Harman did all kinds of listening tests with listeners using the same approach in doing a EQ to accommodate for headphones. And basically their results are very, very similar. So yeah, and I'm just going through each one that had the different score. So let me just. So it says here, this was each of the reviewers had a little comment that they made after I asked them for a quote after their experience there. And so Soundstage said, room fuel is relevant because it's not based on malicious or miscellaneous opinions that could change tomorrow. It's based on years of well-established research that shows strong correlations between what we can measure and what we hear and prefer. This was from, this fellow does a lot of writing, and he trains, he writes for some of the trade magazines. His name is David Zazillo. The trip to NRC was nothing short of magical. Being able to experience firsthand the difference of room feel versus non-room feel in an A/B comparison truly showcased how important room feel technology is in the listening experience. Spending time with Paul Barton at NRC in Ottawa taught a seasoned veteran like myself about how important good measurements are in product development. That was Joe from Headphone Guru. And then Secrets of Home Theater, Paul Barton's dedication to his science and craft manifests itself in the development of room field technology that I experienced firsthand at the legendary NRC facility near Ottawa. Paul beautifully captured the sense of a listening space and a headphone experience, and I never travel without my M4U4s, which deliver the familiar PSB warmth and dynamic sound heard in their in-room loudspeakers. And then Mark Henninger, AVS Forum, the amazing thing about room feel is it does not just work for headphones, it transforms the sound of a pair of T3s playing in an anechoic chamber, creating a pleasant tonal balance that is consistent with the effect room feel has on headphones. It makes sound the way you think it should. This was the editor of an English magazine called Hi-Fi Choice. I was fascinated to meet Paul and experience the amazing work he does at the NRC. To say I was deeply impressed by the effects of room feel would be an understatement. This was Jude Mansella. He's the editor of Head5. Going to Canada's National Research Council to take part in research that Paul Barton has been doing was ear-opening. He's taking his decades of loudspeaker research and applying it to the voicing of headphones. It's a lofty goal to bring loudspeakers in a room voicing to headphones. Loudspeakers in a room voicing to headphones. But Paul is one of the key figures in the frontier of that with room feel. That his research ends up taking shape within headphones, his engineering is very exciting. And his engineers is very exciting. I said, and my conclusion for this was, this informal test was very informative to me and the group of listeners that there is some correlation between frequency response of headphones that is necessary in order to be true to the original intent of the musicians and the producers of recorded music and sounds. The goal of this listening test was achieved in that it showed that there is something that is needed to compensate for the fact that listening to loudspeakers in a room is quite different than headphone listening. That's because headphone listening does not have a room as part of the audio chain. So PSB's solution is room gain and high frequency absorption plus a little bit of secret sauce equals room feel. Since this listening event, I have further refined room feel target curve, and along with the DSP processing that is now in the latest PSB and NAD headphones, not only is the target curve more refined because of this blind listening test, it is now possible to dial in the headphone target curve more accurately with DSP tuning. So I did the first M4U2, and all of the room feel tuning was done passively. And then when we did the M4U8, which is the current noise canceling, I'm using a CSR chip in there, which is very powerful, has a lot of DSP in it. So I was able to implement a lot of the room feel characteristics in DSP. And here's just a group picture of everyone that took part in the room feel listening. This is some other work that I referred to earlier that was done by Harman in California, and his conclusions were when measuring an acoustic coupler, the most preferred headphone produced the smoothest and flattest amplitude response, a response that deviates from the IEC recommended diffuse field calibration. The result provided further evidence that the IEC 60268-7 headphone calibration is not optimal for achieving the best sound quality. It says these were some AES journal papers that Sean did. The state of the art as of today, there is new experimental evidence that the current industry diffuse field and free field standards for calibrating headphones are flawed in terms of their negative effect on sound quality. There is little consensus among headphone manufacturers on the preferred headphone target frequency response required to produce optimal sound quality for reproduction of stereo recordings. The target curves included in the diffuse field and the free field curves in the ISO 11904-2, a modified diffuse field target recommended by Laurel, the unequalized headphone, and a new target response based on the acoustical measurements of a calibrated loudspeaker system in a room for both headphones. The new target based on the in-room response was the most preferred headphone target response. And I did all of this work about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years before he did this work.
It's amazing. Hey, Paul, did you see my little message I sent you? Anytime you want to take a break or get a drink or something.
Oh no, I'm good.
You sure?
Yeah. Here's an interesting curve. Okay. Here's an interesting curve of the blue curve is the target curve that Harman came up with, and you saw the curve that I did. This is done on a grass coupler, so you see the ear canal resonance at around 3 kilohertz, and that's what you see in a headphone response. If you were to see the measurement at the eardrum of either KEMAR or a head torso to see what the frequency response of the ear canal, that's what you would see. So that's the response you see at the eardrum, even though there's a flat response sent into it. But what was interesting with this slide is you can see that there is little agreement among manufacturers as to what the target curve needs to be. Those are just measurements of all kinds of different headphones that Sean had at the time. And the only thing you could say to that is that it's sort of like what I said earlier when we were doing the original blind screen tests in the early days in the 70s at NRC, that different brands of loudspeakers had dramatically different responses, and we could never understand why. Well, that situation is also in headphones. And headphones that I see being measured more and more, and after this work that Sean has done, they've started using an AKG, are now using this target curve to develop more headphones. And so as time goes on, you're going to see exactly what happened to loudspeakers happen to headphones over time based on this double blind screen listening. So there's lots to look forward to.
I got a stupid question and I'll make it quick. So my wife's hearing impaired on both sides. Anything above 5K, she's right?
Right.
But there's been a lot of research and work where you can't hear above that frequency, but you can sense it, right? And I tried this with her. I've got a pair of electrostatic headphones. Same thing. I adjusted the gain. I cranked everything. I set the balance the way she wanted. And she's like, holy shit, like she can hear it. It sounded better to her ears, even though, again, anything above 5K, she can't hear shit.
Well, I'm witness to the fact that if you're listening to pure, like when they do the audiology test to determine what you're hearing is like, they use pure tones.
Okay.
And we did experiments back in the early days where we were actually doing double blind screen tests, or Floyd was doing them actually for a magazine, double blind screen tests comparing the difference between amplifiers. So we had an experiment we set up where we were actually playing the amplifier under test into different speaker loads, electrostatic speakers. And then we took the output of the amplifier and fed it into, attenuated that signal and fed it into a central amplifier that was driving a speaker in a different room. So we could actually hear how the different amplifiers sounded with different loads by switching between them all. And in the experiment, we noticed that one of the amplifiers, we could hear a difference. It was a little bit more open, a little bit more high end. So we took and measured all the different amplifiers' frequency response in the experimental setup. And we noticed because of a grounding problem for one of the amplifiers, there was a slight rise between 10 and 20 kilohertz by 1/4 dB caused by some grounding problem. We got rid of the grounding problem and the problem went away, and now it was very difficult if not impossible, to hear the differences between the amplifiers. But what we did do was we put on pink noise and we listened to the system with and without this ground loop in there, where the frequency response was being boosted by a quarter dB from 10 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz. And we could hear that difference. And what that tells me, but if you were playing a pure tone at those frequencies, not only would it be difficult to hear, but it would be even more difficult to hear a shift in level. And I guess what I'm saying is that we tend to, at very high frequencies, I believe that we tend to hear spectrum. We don't hear individual tones as easily. So it's more of a sensation than it is a discrete ability to hear frequencies. So when you, I mean, I'm not a young guy, but I can tell when something is not tuned well, even as high as 15 kilohertz. And if you play a pure tone of 15 kilohertz to me, I can't hear it. But if it's got a spectrum, like a splash or a wide spectrum, a symbol or something, it's much easier to perceive. So anyway, this is just, there's KEMAR in the anechoic chamber. This is some of the test apparatus that I use when I develop headphones. That was the very first prototype of the M4U2 headphone. That was actually a CNC model that was made on a CNC machine. This is the ear and cheek coupler that I use to measure and develop the headphones. The reason I bought this is much of the development I did on headphones I did in China at the actual factories where we build these things. So I use this because it was portable. I could pack this in my luggage and take it with me. Yeah, so it has a pinna. The pinnas are removable. There's different size pinnas. There's one general pinna that represents the average male pinna, and there's also an average female pinna. And then there's also a left and a right ear. I also did some experiments on developing a coupler that could actually measure more accurately right up to 20 kilohertz. Right now, most of the couplers are limited to about 8 to 10 kilohertz. And it's because for the audiology business and hearing aid technologies, they really weren't interested in anything above about 8 kilohertz. So I worked with two scientists at the National Research Council. Oops. You know, my PowerPoint is kind of weird. For no reason at all, it'll just shut off and reboot.
That's okay. But again, what you said where the audiologists weren't interested in anything above 8K, but as I said, the example being my wife, pure tones, yeah, whatever. She can't hear nothing above 5K, but she can sense it.
Yeah, and that's the reason. I think the reason is that our nervous system and our brain can perceive energy down there. It just can't distinguish exactly what it is. Like the hairs in the nerves of the cochlea somehow are being fired, but it's not in the. Personally, I don't understand it, and I don't think very many people do, if any. Where was I?
Right near right after all the reviews. There we go. I think it's.
I did the further research.
Yeah.
Oh, this was the experiment I was talking about. We actually built a model of the ear canal, and this is just a 3D graphic of the ear canal, and that yellow shaped cylinder on the end of it, that you'll see the blue part is actually a 3D printed ear canal from a scan of a Godiva ear canal. So it took a human ear canal out of a Godiva body and scanned it. And at NRC, they have 14 of these from 14 different Godivas that allowed them to create 3D models and then print these so that they could actually simulate the actual different ear canals. And on the end of that is that brass coupler. And what that brass coupler is that is a cylinder that simulates the eardrum. And how it simulates the eardrum is where it intersects with the blue part. There's actually that surface that interferes with the blue part, which is the membrane, where the membrane of the eardrum would be, actually has about 500 small holes drilled into it, partway down into the cylinder. And the acoustics of those 500 holes represents the impedance of a typical eardrum. A lot of science and math goes into developing this. And that's the actual cylinder. I don't know if and you can see that the ear canal is not a cylinder. It's actually an oval shape.
Yes.
And some of the newer ear canal simulators are starting to go to this shape for doing measurements. And that's my sales pitch slide.
That's all right. That's all right.
So those are all the headphones I've developed. Actually, there's two more after that. There's the M4U8 and the oh no, the M4U8's there. So those are all the headphones that I've developed since I've been developing ear headphones for about 7 years now. And here's a guy in the laundromat listening to M4U2s, but he's in a real room listening to that.
There's a PK Subban ad that I saw you guys did a while back.
Yeah, we sponsored him when he was in the junior Bs hockey. But when he graduated to the NHL, he became too expensive. Although I still think he uses them.
Nice.
On a system where the drivers are not coincident, you will find that unless you're in the exact position that they were tuned for, if you stand up or sit down, all hell breaks loose, because now you get all kinds of overlap frequencies that cause interference and constructive and destructive interference. So those speakers sound good in one position. So I call those speakers antisocial speakers. So, or if you're, and I mean that by, you either listen to them by yourselves, or if everyone wants to really appreciate the ideal listening, all your friends have to sit behind you in the room.
Yeah.
Then everyone can hear the same thing. I find that, and everyone has to be sitting down in the case of a low order linear phase loudspeaker that a linear phase loudspeaker that has non-coincident drivers. The only place is the listening window or the listening axis, which in those speakers is very small. So I tend to stay away from doing that. The other disadvantage of low order crossover to maintain phase linearity is the fact that the tweeter or the smaller driver has to go down so low in frequency that they become very unreliable. So it might take a lot of power to drive it, but a little bit more will blow it up.
Of course.
So weighing all those trade-offs, so I like to use really high order filters, even though they're not linear phase. Their minimum phase is very, very smooth. So if you look at the minimum phase of any PSB product, it's a straight line, but it's on a slope.
Nice. So, and I know you can't reveal what your next flagship is, but you already answered part of the question when I asked you about using DSP in the loudspeakers and all that. But you already answered part of it with the new powered speakers you guys are coming up with. Are you going to be doing something like that in the future with your tower speakers?
Well, let me say it this way.
Fair enough.
The future is all-in-one systems, as far as I can tell.
Understood.
As much as you have the very small population of people who like to play around and choose their speaker and choose their amplifier, choose their source, choose their DAC, and do comparisons. It's sort of a hobby, but the majority population who aspire and have the finances to build really beautiful sounding systems, they don't want to have to play around, and they're not interested in switching out amps. They're just interested in what they get for their money, and and whether it's aesthetically pleasing and all of those things. So I believe the future for loudspeakers is smart loudspeakers that are closed systems. And I'm actually excuse me, if you know the other brands like Blue Sound, that is part of the Lenbrook group of companies. Lenbrook is the parent company, which has ownership of NAD, PSB, and Blue Sound, and all three brands are owned by the parent company Lenbrook. And Lenbrook became one of my partners back in '85. That was when we joined forces. So that's how PSB got involved with Lenbrook. That was even before NAD and Blue Sound. PSB was Lenbrook's first brand.
I remember that.
Yeah. So, but Blue Sound has a sound bar, a Pulse Flex, they call it, Pulse Mini, and a Pulse 2i. And all of those products are totally powered loudspeakers with an app interface and GUI and all kinds of wonderful PSB characteristics, if you want to call it that.
That's your fingerprint. That's what I call your fingerprint on it. That's it. Yeah.
Anything acoustic under all three brands is in the PSB domain. We do all the acoustics.
And now that you have NAT as part of the whole thing there, again, with the whole DSP and the powered loudspeakers, you've got even more quote unquote horsepower now to go along with your product line.
Oh yeah. Well, we all complement each other in all respects. I have the resources at my fingertips to build the best amplification in the world. I have the best people to build the best Wi-Fi communications and streaming capabilities, and we do acoustics, I hope, second to none. So it's a nice combination.
Sure.
And you're going to see a lot more of this kind of thing coming out.
Yeah, well, again, it's not like a lot of the other companies are doing the powered loudspeaker routine, but you don't see as much of the science in it as you do with the stuff you guys are doing at the NRC and that. And you can, at the end of the day, your ears won't lie to you. At the end of the day, that's why I was asking, because like what you have now with the Alpha P5 powered, it's kind of like a taste of what's yet to come, is what I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's the beginning.
Yeah, so the gateway drug.
Yeah. Actually, I'm whenever research, a lot of products and a lot of experiments and a lot of prototyping that gets done never meets the light of day.
Yeah.
So I've already designed all these things. It's just that now the marketing has to figure out what it is exactly they want. But the technology, I'm way ahead of them.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
It's just a matter of the marketing and the strategy, the strategy of the product development, the thing that we call the roadmap.
Of course.
Right now, I can honestly say, on the roadmap, not including the alphas that we just brought out, I have about 40 new products that I'm working on.
Wow. Okay, so for the guys that we still have online, because you saw a couple of people, a couple of them dropped off, not because they were bored, but trust me. Do we have any more questions for Paul? Because there's just a couple other quick things that we were going to go over before we wrapped it up. Because I know we missed a couple of you guys while we were doing all this, so speak now. And for some reason, I should be able to go gallery view. I see John's there. So we got 3 Canadians in the room now, Paul?
Oh, really?
Yeah, Spicy Dave, myself, and of course, so Spicy Dave's in Calgary at his mom's place, but he lives in Nova Scotia. He's the one with the 4 quad ESL speakers. And
Cool.
The very unsocial speakers.
That's right. In a way, you're right. That's right. Well, I see some panel speakers there. Those are
Those are Martin Logan's.
Oh, okay. Martin Logan.
Yeah, I had a question to do with the headphones and your equalization curves. Is that not something that could be built into a headphone amplifier, and then you can use any headphones at all and still get that same kind of curve?
Well, let me just say this, that going forward, I mean, room feel is kind of a, I hate to say it this way, but it's probably true, it's kind of a brute force approach, because we really don't know the individual characteristics of a listener, and those things become fairly unique, different pinnas and different, what appears at the ear canal is not a perfect transfer, because people's ear pinnas are different, they're different sizes. So what I measure on the coupler may not be totally representative of all listeners. So going forward, we're going to make it so that, I mean, we could build a headphone amp that had different target curves in, but what we're going to do is build in an app with our headphones that will not only be able to manipulate some of the room feel for the personal likes, but it will also be able to control the noise canceling, so that with different types of noisy environments, it will work on different frequencies differently. So on a bus, it will be one kind of noise. On an airplane, it's another kind of noise. Just giving you a little bit more flexibility, and that will be in the app. We're also putting in, we've done some collaboration with a company out of Sweden, and the name of the company is called Audio Do, and you can look them up on the internet. And they've done a lot of work on hearing loss and characterizing hearing for different age groups, and also have put together, I've been working with them on this, putting together some very short, simple test sequence that a listener can listen to, just like sort of like an audiology test that gives the app some feedback and information about the listener's capability. And then the listener can choose different degrees of compensation for them to come up with something that might compensate a little bit for their hearing loss as they get older. So it's just another level of refinement that we're going to be working to even make headphones better and more personalized for the individuals. It's not an easy thing to do, because we don't know enough about the differences between individuals, let alone being able to tune a headphone that matches an individual. But we are working towards making that. And I think you're going to see a lot more companies working in that direction.
Well, I got a hearing impaired case study over here you can use anytime, Paul.
All right. Well, now that I know you guys exist and are interested in hearing someone like me rattle on about things.
No, this has been awesome, man. This is
so as time goes on, we can maybe do updates on this type of thing from time to time in some of your meetings. I have no problem.
Excellent. Excellent. And
I
again,
do have a question.
go for it, John. The first question was, did you have any interaction with the speaker builder folks back in the day when they had the magazine and the website? And the second question John had was, do you use your speakers to do cable evaluation? Obviously, NAD builds their own DACs, that type of thing.
Well, we've done listening tests on all parts of the audio chain in terms of double blind screen listening. And all I would say to that is the differences between loudspeakers and the differences between phono cartridges is much greater than differences between amplifiers and DACs and all of those things. So once you get you know, a decent sounding loudspeaker, and the reason the speaker and the turntable are the most difficult is because they are transducers. They are turning one form of energy into another form of energy. And when you do that, there are all kinds of challenges. There are all kinds of non-linearities that are much more profound than the differences that you have in amplifiers. I mean, you can make an amplifier that sounds just terribly bad, but I'm talking about competent amplifiers and reasonable speaker wire. And there are differences, but the order they are in from a scientific viewpoint, and the perception differences are very low order by comparison. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. And you know, all I can say to, you know, differences in speaker wire and that sort of thing is all I can say is I would invite people to do, whenever they evaluate things like that, is to try and do it double blind so that you don't know what you're listening to, and see if you can consistently pick one over the other, and you know, let your ears be the ones that tell you that. I mean, I have found some, you know, some things that are noticeable. Something I found that's very noticeable is, you know, if you get both left and right speaker calibrated very closely to one another, it really, really improves imaging, because you use the arrival times of the left and right speaker to help your brain map out a sound stage. And if the left and right don't give you the same signal when it should be the same signal, then the illusion of an image or a sound stage collapses completely. So getting two speakers that are very closely matched, set up in such a way that the sound coming from them and reflections related to them in the room are very symmetrical. It's a good step in the direction of getting good sound stage and good imaging. And once you get that happening, you know, I invite people to do double blind screen or comparative listening of some of the other components in the audio chain. But my focus is mainly on the weakest link, which is the loudspeaker.
Well, we don't have opportunities to do these double-blind studies of other components in the chain because, you know, one dealer carries one line, another dealer carries another line, and you can't audition various components at the same time.
I know. I don't know the solution to the answer. I'm just telling you, if I were doing it to you know, to evaluate, that's the approach that I would take. You know, I find that casual listening, you know, over pizza and a beer don't really cut it in the scientific world. So you know, we have done these double blind screen tests, and, you know, wire and different amplifiers and different interconnect cables are smaller order effects than choosing the right phono cartridge or choosing the right loudspeaker or setting up the speaker properly in a room and where you sit in the room. One rule of thumb I always like to start with is keep your speakers a bit closer together than you are away from them. A lot of people will put the speakers too far apart, and then the center image becomes very difficult to be solid. As the speakers move further apart relative to your position. So the triangle should be such that the base of the triangle is shorter than the distance you are away. But I don't know, double blind screen tests are, maybe some of us are here because of that. And the reason I said that is the medical community uses double blind tests with the drug companies. In fact, that's what they're doing right now with the vaccines in the coronavirus and some of the medications that they're trying. What they do is they take a group of people, they give half of them a placebo, and they give the other half some drug that they're trying to test. But the doctor who's overseeing them, diagnosing and seeing the symptoms change or as time goes on between the placebo people and the people who have the drug under test, the doctor doesn't know who's got the placebo and who's got the drug. Only the drug company knows that. That's called a double blind screen test. And so it's a very good way of doing not only medicine, but it's also a good way of doing psychology.
Something I'm interested in your opinion on, and maybe it's not politically wise for you to give it, but the state of the audio press today. When I'm shopping for an audio component, it seemed like 20 or 30 years ago, or when I first started out, there were publications that had pretty technical product reviews with test results and listening tests, and they used one to validate and support the other. Today, I don't know that there's any publications or anything that's available to me as a consumer that gives any real technical evaluation of any equipment.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. It's because I've asked that question for years and years and years to the magazines, and in fact was very dedicated to trying convince more and more of the media to take this under their wing and do more of it. And I have literally invited, and they have attended. You can name any magazine currently available in the United States and in the past, and I can tell you that every single reviewer from all of those magazines has been a guest of mine at the National Research Council, given the same experiment that I explained earlier in a double blind screen test. So they all know about it. They've all experienced it. But I think maybe there's some commercial stuff going on there. And as much as I hate to say it, that sometimes gets in the way of good science. Sorry.
No,
that's the reality.
I just thought it was lack of training, lack of technical training.
Well, that too. There are a few people that I admire. Yeah, there are a few people that I admire in this way. There's a magazine, a website called Soundstage magazine, run by a fellow named Doug Snyder. And he actually has his offices in Ottawa, Canada. And he uses the National Research Council to do all of his speaker evaluations. Now, I don't think he does double blind screen tests, which is also part of what I have been talking about. But at least he gets reasonable data, and he gets data that can be compared from one brand to another, all under one roof. And I think that could be very valuable for customers. I don't know if you've ever gone to his website, Soundstage Measure.
This is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's called loudspeakermeasurements.com. Yeah, so just Google Soundstage Magazine, and he has a site there that's called Loudspeaker Measurements, a link, and he has speakers that he's measured there, and all your favorites, every brand from all around the world that he's tested at the National Research Council, including PSBs, by the way. So it's a good database for getting your feet wet on good comparisons between different loudspeakers, and then look at reviews of people, look at reviews that people have written about those loudspeakers, and see what, if you can see in the measurements, any of their comments.
Yeah.
Another magazine that I have a lot of confidence in is Stereophile magazine. John Atkinson is quite a good editor. He's no longer editing the magazine. He's given it over to another gentleman, but John is still doing loudspeaker measurements and evaluations in his home. And John, I'll tell you a little story. Back when Stereophile were back in Santa Fe, New Mexico, I visited them when John was doing a review. I delivered a pair of loudspeakers when John was doing a review of our Stratus loudspeaker back in the, I think it was the early 90s. And he published the review of his measurements after I visited him. He hadn't measured the loudspeaker when I visited him. I just delivered the speaker and we set it up and listened to it. Then he did measurements after that. And he uses a maximum length sequence, like a MLS sequence of noise, to do free field measurements in a normal sized room by truncating the time window so that he can only look at the sound that comes directly from the loudspeaker. And when he published the review of that particular speaker, I saw the measurement in the magazine, and I called John up and I said, John, that doesn't look like my measurement. There must be something wrong with the speaker. So, you know, back and forth a little bit. I said, John, I think it might be your microphone. So he sent me the microphone to Ottawa. I went up to Ottawa and I measured. He had a B&K recording microphone from Denmark. It wasn't one of their lab mics. It was actually one of their music recording microphones. So I put it in the chamber, and I can calibrate a microphone with the calibrated microphone in the chamber by putting the chamber microphone in one position, and then I took John's microphone and I hung it on a string about exactly 6 inches below. So I measured a loudspeaker in the chamber with the reference microphone, and then I moved it up 6 inches. I moved the microphone array up 6 inches, which meant that John's microphone was in exactly the same position as the reference microphone. And I did a measurement of that of the same loudspeaker. And I subtracted the two results, and I got what ended up being a correction curve for John's microphone compared to the lab microphone that I was using. And the lab microphone was calibrated by the acoustics division at NRC. So I knew it was flat. In fact, NRC are world famous for doing microphone calibrations worldwide. They have these, actually, it's amazing what they do to calibrate a microphone. But I was confident that my microphone measurement, or the microphone I was using, was well calibrated. So I sent John the correction file for his microphone, and I sent back the microphone. And the next issue that John published in Stereophile magazine was he republished every speaker measurement that he had done up until that point with the new correction, and credited me for showing him the light.
That's awesome.
So John has an open mind. He's a very good listener. Excuse me.
It's okay.
I've had him to NRC on a few occasions. He's experienced the double blind screen listening. And now when I look at his measurements in the magazine, they very closely match my measurements. So we're all happy. We're all happy.
That's
So anyway, I hope I've been of some help to you guys.
this has been. I mean, tonight was awesome, and that I knew this was going to be an education tonight. You know, and that's what I told everybody. I says, like, I know when Jeff is our consummate salesman in the audio club, so he's always looking for an angle. Hey man, can we get Dr. Toole? Hey man, can we get a pair of speakers down here? So it's all good.
Yeah, well, Floyd likes, I don't know whether Floyd still does these things.
Yeah.
I just got an email from him the other day. He's had some ups and downs in the last little while, and he was actually in England when the coronavirus hit.
Yeah.
And so he's stuck in an apartment somewhere in London, waiting for the chance to get back. So he's coming home shortly, but I don't know if he does these seminar type things. But I do invite you. I do invite you all to look up his book. Actually, I have a copy of it here.
And I actually I'm renting it on Amazon right now because Amazon allows you to rent the books.
Oh, you're kidding.
It's like the initial. It's like $10 for the first month, and then it's a couple dollars every other. It's like going to the library.
Wow.
It's exactly that. So I think I'm in chapter 4 right now, because the beginning of the book he talks about the basics, and then as you get more into the book, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So I still have a ways to go.
Yeah. Well, Floyd wrote the book. I lived I lived the time that he wrote that book.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of it was done when he in '91 when he went to Harmon.
Mm-hmm.
But we keep in touch and collaborate. I speak to him on a regular basis. He's quite the character. I'll tell you one thing. He had some bad news just a little while ago. He said to me, maybe it was a couple months ago, maybe 2-3 months ago. He actually called me, and he said I had a bad week. I said, oh, what was that? He said, well, my father just died. And I said, oh, that's terrible. He said, yeah, he was 107. Floyd is 81, and his dad just died at 107.
Oh man, that's amazing. So,
okay, guys. I've talked myself out. I hope I've been of some help.
Well, it's 12:30 for you right now. Dave's in Calgary, so I think he's an hour ahead of us. I think, and the rest of us are in Arizona. So
10:30 here.
Oh, okay,
10:40.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's 9:30 here. Paul, thank you again so much, man, for doing this. You know, you've educated all of us. You've straightened out a lot of myths. And what I'll do is I'll edit the video and everything else. Make sure you check it out, and then I'll send you future invites. So whether you have time, whether you can make them or not, because we've got some few other Zoom things coming up in the following weeks. I'll make sure you get that info as well.
All right.
All right, guys. Thanks again for staying with us for the 3 hours there, and we'll definitely talk soon.
Okay. Nice.
All right, guys.
Thanks very much.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. So did we.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Stop.